Good morning, welcome back to the channel where we're currently reading the book of Judges. But before we begin our next chapter, Father, as I read and receive your word, may it deeply be rooted in me, so when difficulty comes, it will be your word that encourages and strengthens me. Amen. So we're on chapter 14 today, and we're on Samson currently. So Samson's riddle. One day, when Samson was in Timnah, he noticed a certain Philistine woman. When he returned home, he told his father and mother, "I want to marry a young Philistine woman I saw in Timnah." His father and mother objected strenuously. "Isn't there one woman in our tribe or among all the Israelites you can marry? Why must you go to the pagan Philistines to find a wife?" But Samson told his father, "Get her for me. She is the one I want." His father and mother didn't realize the Lord was at work in this, creating an opportunity to disrupt the Philistines who ruled over Israel at that time. As Samson and his parents were going down to Timnah, a young lion attacked Samson near the vineyards of Timnah. At that moment, the Spirit of the Lord powerfully took control of him, and he ripped the lion's jaws apart with his bare hands. He did it as easily as if it were a young goat, but he didn't tell his father or mother about it. When Samson arrived in Timnah, he talked with the woman and was very pleased with her. Later, when he returned to Timnah for the wedding, he turned off the path to look at the carcass of the lion, and he found that a swarm of bees had made some honey in the carcass. He scooped some of the honey into his hands and ate it along the way. He also gave some to his father and mother, and they ate it. But he didn't tell them he had taken the honey from the carcass of the lion. As his father was making final arrangements for the marriage, Samson threw a party at Timnah, as was the custom of that day. 30 young men from the town were invited to be his companions. Samson said to them, "Let me tell you a riddle. If you solve my riddle during these 7 days of celebration, I will give you 30 plain linen robes and 30 fancy robes. But if you can't solve it, then you must give me 30 linen robes and 30 fancy robes." "All right," they agreed. "Let's hear your riddle." So he said, "From the one who eats came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet." 3 days later, they were still trying to figure it out. On the 4th day, they said to Samson's wife, "Get the answer to the riddle from your husband, or we'll burn down your father's house with you in it. Did you invite us to this party just to make us poor?" So Samson's wife came to him in tears and said, "You don't love me, you hate me. You have given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer." "I haven't even given the answer to my father or mother," he replied. "Why should I tell you?" So she cried whenever she was with him and kept it up for the rest of the celebration. At last, on the 7th day, he told her the answer because of her persistent nagging. Then she gave the answer to the young men. So before sunset on the 7th day, the men of the town came to Samson with the answer, "What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion?" Samson replied, "If you haven't plowed with my heifer, you wouldn't have the answer to my riddle." Then the Spirit of the Lord powerfully took control of him. He went down to the town of Ashkelon, killed 30 men, took their belongings, and gave their clothing to the men who had answered the riddle. But Samson was furious about what had happened, so he went back home to live with his father and mother. So his wife was given in marriage to the man who had been Samson's best man at the wedding. Samson's vengeance on the Philistines. Chapter 15. Later on, during the wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat as a present to his wife. He intended to sleep with her, but her father wouldn't let him. "I really thought you hated her," he explained, "so I gave her in marriage to your best man. But look, her sister is more beautiful than she is. Marry her instead." Samson said, "This time I cannot be blamed for everything I'm going to do to you Philistines." Then he went out and caught 300 foxes. He tied their tails together in pairs and fastened a torch to each pair of their tails. Then he lit the torches and let the foxes run through the fields of the Philistines. He burned all their grain to the ground, including the grain still in piles that all had been bundled. He also destroyed the grapevines and olive trees. "Who did this?" the Philistines demanded. "Samson," was the reply. because his father-in-law from Timnah gave Samson's wife to be married to his best man. So the Philistines went and got the woman and her father and burned them to death. Because you did this, Samson vowed, I will take my revenge on you, and I won't stop until I'm satisfied. So he attacked the Philistines with great fury and killed many of them. Then he went to live in a cave in the rock of Etam. The Philistines retaliated by setting up camp in Judah and raiding the town of Lehi. The men of Judah asked the Philistines, Why have you attacked us? The Philistines replied, We have come to capture Samson. We have come to pay him back for what he did to us. So 3,000 men of Judah went down to get Samson at the cave in the rock of Etam. They said to Samson, Don't you realize the Philistines rule over us? What are you doing to us? But Samson replied, I only paid them back for what they did to me. But the men of Judah told him, We have come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines. All right, Samson said, but promise that you won't kill me yourselves. We will tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines, they replied. We won't kill you. So they tied him up with the 2 new ropes and led him away from the rock. Of Samson riding in Lehi, the Philistines came shouting in triumph. But the Spirit of the Lord powerfully took control of Samson, and he snapped the ribs on his arms as if they were burnt strands of flax, and they fell from his wrists. Then he picked up a donkey's jawbone that was lying on the ground and killed 1,000 Philistines with it. And Samson said, With the jawbone of a donkey, I've made heaps on heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey, I've killed 1,000 men. When he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone, and the place was named Jawbone Hill. Now Samson was very thirsty, and he cried out to the Lord, You have accomplished this great victory by the strength of your servant. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of these pagan people? So God caused water to gush out of a hollow of the ground at Lehi, and Samson was revived as he drank. Then he named that place, the spring of the one who cried out, and it is still in Lehi to this day. Samson was Israel's judge for 20 years while the Philistines ruled the land. Chapter 16. Samson removes Gaza's gates. One day Samson went to the Philistine city of Gaza and spent the night with a prostitute. Word soon spread that Samson was there, so the men of Gaza gathered together and waited all night at the city gates. They kept quiet during the night, saying to themselves, When light of morning comes, we will kill him. But Samson only stayed in bed until midnight. Then he got up, took hold of the city gates with his 2 posts, and lifted them, bar and all, right out of the ground. He put them on his shoulders and carried them all the way to the top of the hill across from Hebron. Samson and Delilah. Later, Samson fell in love with a woman named Delilah, who lived in the valley of Sorek. The leaders of the Philistines went to her and said, Find out from Samson what makes him so strong, and how he can be overpowered and tied up securely. Then each of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So Delilah said to Samson, Please tell me what makes you so strong, and what it would take to tie you up securely. Samson replied, If I am tied up with 7 now new bowstrings that have not yet been dried, I will be weak as anyone else. So the Philistine leaders brought Delilah 7 new bowstrings, and she tied Samson up with it. She had hidden some men in one of the rooms of her house, and she cried, Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you. But Samson snapped the bowstrings as if they were string that had been burned in a fire. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. Afterward, Delilah said to him, You made fun of me and told me a lie. Now please tell me how you could be tied up securely. Samson replied, If I am tied up with brand new ropes and have never been used, I will be as weak as anyone else. So Delilah took new ropes and tied him up with it. The men were hiding in the room as before. But again Delilah cried out, Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you. But Samson snapped the ropes from his arms as if they were thread. Then Delilah said, You have been making fun of me and telling me lies. Won't you please tell me how you are tied up securely? If you weave the 7 braids of my hair into the fabric on your loom and tighten it with a loom shuttle, I will be weak as anyone else. So while he slept, Delilah wove the 7 braids of his hair into the fabric and tightened it with the loom shuttle. Again she cried out, Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you. But Samson woke up, pulled back the loom shuttle, and yanked his hair away from the loom and the fabric. Then Delilah pouted. How can you say you love me when you don't confide in me? You've made fun of me 3 times now, and you still haven't told me what makes you strong." So day after day she nagged him until he couldn't stand it any longer. Finally Samson told her his secret. "My hair has never been cut," he confessed, "for I was dedicated to God as a Nazarene from birth. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me and I would become as weak as anyone else." Delilah realized he finally told her the truth, so she sent for the Philistine leaders. "Come back one more time," she said, "for he has told me everything." So the Philistine leaders returned and brought the money with them. Delilah lulled Samson to sleep with his head in her lap, and she called in a man to shave off his hair, making his capture certain. And his strength left him. Then she cried out, "Samson, the Philistines have come to capture you." When he woke up, he thought, "I will do as before and shake myself free." But he didn't realize the Lord had left him. So the Philistines captured him and gouged out his eyes. They took him to Gaza, where he was bound with bronze chains and made to grind grain in prison. But before long, his hair began to grow back. Samson's final victory. The Philistine leaders held a great festival, offering sacrifices and praising their god Dagon. They said, "Our God has given us victory over our enemy Samson." When the people saw him, they praised their God, saying, "Our God has delivered our enemy to us. The one who killed so many of us is now in our power." Half drunk by now, the people demanded, "Bring out Samson so he can perform for us." So he was brought out from the prison and made to stand at the center of the temple between the 2 pillars supporting the roof. Samson said to the servant who was leading him by hand, "Place my hand against the 2 pillars. I want to rest against them." The temple was completely filled with people. All the Philistine leaders were there. There were about 300,000 on the roof who were watching Samson making fun of him. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, "Sovereign Lord, remember me again. O God, please strengthen me one more time so that I may pay back the Philistines for the loss of my eyes." Then Samson put his hands on the center pillars of the temple and pushed against them with all his might. "Let me die with the Philistines," he prayed. And the temple crashed down on the Philistine leaders and all the people. So he killed more people than he had during his entire lifetime. Later, his brothers and other relatives went down to get his body. They took him back home and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol, where his father Manoah was buried. Samson had been Israel's judge for 20 years. Well, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate it. We'll continue in the book of Judges tomorrow. And have a blessed day.